So I had a client a few months ago called Mealmates where I just did a branding sprint. Just the typography, the colors, the logo, no UI and no UX. But I threw in one screen design for fun just to show the direction. A few months later, he comes back and shows what he's been building. He's been solo vibe coding this entire app, which is super impressive, and he wanted some quick feedback on how he implemented the UI. I thought this would be perfect to share with you because here's what I've learned. Making something look good isn't about being naturally artistic or having some special talent. It's really about just knowing a few principles and making intentional decisions one at a time. Today, I'm walking you through exactly how I approached redesigning his app screen, and I gave myself just 1 hour to do it. We started off with this screen and finally ended up with this one. And if you've been wanting to try design and don't know where to start, or you open Figma and immediately feel overwhelmed, I structured this entire video specifically for you. We're going to go slow, I'll explain every click, and by the end, you'll see that it's actually not that scary. Hi everyone, I'm Cecilia, and if you're new here, I'm a freelance product designer who recently left corporate. Today's video is a little bit different because I'm not designing something from scratch. I'm taking something that already exists and making it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. Why am I doing this? I've been getting so many comments from so many people saying that they want to start designing, but they're intimidated by Figma or they don't know where to begin. Starting with a redesign is way less scary than a blank canvas, so I figured this would be a great place to start. Alright, so let me give you the full context here. This project is called Mealmates, and it was my second official freelance project. My client is solo developing this app, and I was introduced to him through Christian. They were grabbing coffee, and he mentioned that he needed some help with branding, so Christian was able to connect us seamlessly. The app idea is actually brilliant. You input in all your recipes, and it generates a weekly meal plan. As someone who stares at the fridge every night wondering what to make, we definitely need this app. Like I mentioned before, this was just a branding sprint, but I decided to include one screen design. From there, my client proceeded with development and showed us those new screens for some quick feedback. Of those screens, I chose one and wanted to redesign it. And here's my rule. I gave myself 1 hour maximum for this redesign, because without time limits, I could spend weeks perfecting one small change and never be happy with it. This constraint helped me focus on what really matters. Next up, let's dive into Figma. Alright, so let me show you my Figma board and how I organize everything. This might seem basic, but when you're starting out, even knowing how to structure your files is huge. I also realized that keeping my board organized just helps me in the long run. I used to put everything into a Figma board with no organization and it would just look like a crime scene, and sometimes I still work that way, but when I try to go back to look for something, I would spend 3 times as long trying to find it. So when I'm done designing for the day, I try to organize everything before I fully log off, and it's really helped my process. Okay, so up here is the original branding sprint for the freelance project, and I'm only going to briefly go over this super quickly since this video is not about the branding, but I just wanted to give you some more context. We started with the inspiration images from the client. He already had a pretty clear direction, and this was so helpful because not every project starts from zero. This got rid of the entire need to do a full mood boarding exploration session, so it definitely saved some time for the client. From there, I went on the hunt for some typography that could go well with what he was thinking, and I gave him a bunch of different ideas and a bunch of different options for the display font, as well as the body font that you would see on the app. Then we did a huge sprint for finding the main logo of the app, as you can see here, and some inspiration and ideas for those app logos down below. On the right of that were more explorations with the actual name of the app to use in the logo, and down here were the final ultimate options that my client initially liked from that big collection of ideas that we had. For the branding section, we finalized the color palette. We were ultimately picking between green and red, and we decided to go with red because in the food industry, I mentioned this in my past video, they use a lot of warm tone colors because apparently it's an appetite trigger. So you see a lot of food apps and food delivery apps using the color red, orange, and yellow, so we wanted to continue that. This color also kept popping up on the inspiration apps that the client provided for me as well. You can see here there's yellow and red, so we kept that. We also liked the cream color and the vibes that it gives, and also landed on the Libre Baskerville font for the display font and Avenue Next font for the body font. Here we went with the knife logo at a certain angle as the final logo for the app. And here is the key part. These 3 gray screens here, these are what he originally gave me. These are developer designed, functional, but they have no UI design applied. And with the branding sprint that we just finished, I just wanted to include some screens for him so that he can have a bit of direction on how to UI design his screens. From there, I went on Mobbin to create a recipe screen for him. I'll be talking more about Mobbin, especially later on, but when I was working on this recipe screen, it was the first place I went to see what other food and recipe apps looked like. Here are a bunch of screenshots that I took from Mobbin so that I could recognize some patterns. I've never designed for a food related app before, So I just wanted to make sure that I was following UX patterns that were common in the industry so that users are more comfortable and know what to expect when using MealMate. When you look at this recipe screen board as a whole, you can see that they heavily focus on aesthetic food images at the top, then divide the recipe information below that, with the title, key information such as serving size or cook time, the ingredients, and then the steps to make the recipe. Because of that, I made these 2 recipe screen options here, and this sets up the context of where we were starting. Again, this was just for fun. I don't completely love this design, but it was something that I offered to my client to give him a direction for the UI and see how he could incorporate the branding that we've decided upon into the app. Also, this food image that I use is from the Unsplash plugin. These are all the food images that I found, and you can find that by going here, plugins and widgets, loading Unsplash. And yeah, they have a bunch of different aesthetic images that you can choose from. Let's search up food. And yeah, you can see here is the same one here. What you do is just click on it and then it'll just load it up for you here. Super simple. Also really helpful when you're looking for very specific placeholder images for your UI. Alright, so at this point we had completely ended the project with MealMates, but several months later my client emailed me and Christian just to let us know that he was still working on the development. He provided me with 5 screens here, and they look great for the first MVP. You can definitely see where the inspiration came from with this screen that I provided for him, such as the cream color background, the red brand accent color, and the typography choices. From these screens, I chose the weekly menu screen to redesign for him very quickly because it seemed like the simplest one for now, but also one of the most impactful ones. So this weekly menu screen is just a screenshot that he gave to us through email. So I actually spent some time recreating that in Figma so that I can show you exactly how I made my design decisions and how I end up with the final screen that I designed. I ultimately made 4 iterations of the screen, as you can see here, with this one being the final one. I will say that I cheated a little in the last 2 screens. They did take me over the 1 hour limit. I stopped at the second stage, but I wasn't completely happy with it, especially after looking at some more inspiration screens. So I continued working, and this will be the final product. Next, I'll be starting on what you probably clicked on the video for. Thanks for sticking along for the context. I do think it was important. Now let's start designing. I'll be showing you exactly what I do in Figma, and more importantly, why I'm making the design decisions. If you're following along, feel free to pause whenever you need to. Alright, so quick overview. These are the 5 screens that my client gave to us. I chose the weekly menu to redesign, and this is a screenshot from him. I spent some time recreating that in Figma so that I can show you exactly step by step how to get to these next screens. So for this first iteration, we'll be creating this screen. Let's get started. Alright, so the first thing I changed was this background color from cream to white. I did this because the cream made the app look very outdated, and most apps have a white background for readability and to make it modern and sleek. I know in my original designs I had for him, I had a cream background, but seeing it in real time, it does not look very good to me. Second, I wanted to fix up this button, give it a lot more padding so that it looks a little bit more button-like and has more breathing room. For padding, I always try to use multiples of 4. It's a mobile design standard and it makes handoff to developers so much easier. So 4, 8, 16, 24 pixels, everything kind of scales nicely. I also changed the font weight to regular because I don't think the bold is needed here. Whenever there's too many font weights, it can get a little distracting. Then of course I left aligned it because the entire header area is left aligned and I wanted to keep that consistent. Also again, changed the corner radius to 8 because I wanted to keep it in multiples of 4. Third thing is these red divider lines. They're a little bit too bold, but I did want to keep the red brand color here, so I can just change the opacity to 10, since I do think the dividers are important in this list view because it's very text heavy and it'll help the viewer with the text hierarchy. I also wanted to span the entire screen, so I can go ahead and make this container have 0 padding and then fix the padding up here to have 20. That's exactly what I wanted. Next up, I wanted to change all the black colors to a softer gray. This gray does come from our brand color palette from the dark gray. Pro tip is you can click on the whole frame, go to selection colors, and if you want to get rid of the black, just replace it. So now all of these blacks should be a softer gray color. It's a very subtle change. I feel like a dark gray is just a bit warmer and more inviting and gives a softer look that matches well with the fonts and the color palettes that we've chosen. After that, I wanted to work on these rows for the list. The first thing we need to do is set up the stacks correctly. This right chevron here is below all of the words and I want it to be right in the middle of the entire row. So that's what I need to fix first. The biggest thing is I kind of reorganized everything to be in the correct frames and ultimately center aligned this frame. Then I made the recipe name a bit heavier on the font weight because it's the title and it's the main part of the row that the user should be focusing on. So let's make this bold. I feel like the information hierarchy is important to keep in mind here. You want to show the important part of the row and make it very evident, but also not to have too many different font weights and font sizes and font colors because then it just looks too busy and distracting. Let me fix the rest of these rows. All right, fixed up the rest of the list. Next, I wanted to break up the text heaviness. If you zoom out, there's not a lot of imagery here other than the icons. So for the days of the week, instead of putting it above, let's try giving it its own section on the left and turn it into kind of a badge with our two brand colors, red and cream. I think this was just me getting the ball rolling on trying to bring in imagery and break up such a text-heavy screen. So let's continue to do that for the rest of the list. I also wanted to add some padding so that there's more breathing room. Same with this section here. And it's looking a lot like this one. I also wanted to make these chevrons a little bit bigger. Let's go ahead and do that. Maybe make the thickness a little bigger. Next, I'll make the rest of the list look more like this. It's starting to look a lot more like our first iteration. I also added an emoji for the weekly main menu header at the top, and I went with this fork, knife, and plate emoji because it gets the point across, it matches the screen, and it also wasn't too distracting. A quick tip that will save your life is auto layout. This is a completely different topic and something that you can definitely start looking into when starting Figma because it'll take up too much time today. Instead of grouping things, I tend to use frames because frames just have a lot more power than groups. You can give it rules and directions on where the content should sit within a frame. And the reason why auto layout is so great is that it helps with different screen sizes, even on mobile. So every iPhone and every Android phone and all the different models of those phones have different screen sizes. So this is very important that your designs work for all screens. Also, if you're interested and want a couple more topics to look into when designing, is generating color styles and text styles and also layout guides within Figma itself to keep everything consistent. This is usually what I do with my other clients, but since this is just one screen, I didn't do any of that and I wanted to keep it very simple. Another topic you could look into is creating components for your project. For instance, I would probably make this one list row into a component so that when I make one tiny change, I wouldn't have to duplicate that change across here. It'll just do that automatically since it's a component. Last but not least, I just wanted to fix up the font sizes and the colors. Like this gray, I want it to be a little bit darker so that it's easier to read for the user. And then make this a little bit bigger as well. Maybe give it more space from the top, and there we have it. All right, so that's iteration 1 finished. It's already looking better, but I'm not quite satisfied yet. When you're designing, it's important to trust that gut feeling, and if something feels off, it probably is. Next up is the second design iteration. Alright, so we just got back home and I was looking at the first design iteration and I still didn't like how it was just so text heavy. It did seem a bit cleaner but still very generic, so I wanted to include more imagery into it. In order to get some more inspiration, I went on Mobbin to see how other food apps list recipes. This is literally my research process. By the way, they're my first ever sponsor, so a huge shout out and a huge thank you to Mobbin for sponsoring this video. I've mentioned them in most of my previous videos, so you know how much this product is ingrained into my design process. So let's take a look at Mobbin. So here's the Mobbin website. They have a bunch of different categories and screens, UI elements, and flows, if that's specifically what you're looking for. And you can also filter by latest, most popular, and top rated. So let's search up recipe list to see if any other apps have any screens with that. Here are hundreds of real app screens. Before Mobbin, I would have to actually hunt for all of these food apps, download them onto my phone, and screenshot from there for inspiration, which took hours. So here is my process. I see what I like, then I would copy, go directly into Figma, and just paste here. And it's really nice because down here, you can see which app it comes from, so you know exactly what you're referencing. Let's find some more. I like this one. Let's paste here. And don't judge yet, just keep collecting and then keep pasting screens directly into Figma. This actually ended up being my board. So I just arrange them into a frame. I give them a little bit of a radius just to make it a little bit softer, but you definitely don't have to do that. And then start analyzing the patterns. All right, so looking at my consolidated board of food recipe list screens, you can see that they're very image focused. All of them show a main aesthetic image of the food, the title. Some of them include certain key facts, such as a calorie count, or a star rating, or a bookmark, or even maybe the cook time. And that's something something to keep in mind for our new designs. Because of that, in my second iteration, I definitely wanted to incorporate all of those elements. Remember, this isn't copying, it's understanding patterns, because users expect certain things, especially in certain industries, so don't reinvent the wheel when the wheel already works. Alright, so now time for iteration number 2. Now we have a direction and some inspiration, so let's make this a little bit better. So let's get started. Starting off, I got rid of the day of the week from that box and put an image of the recipe food into that box instead. Let's do that very quickly here. Let's create a text box. Let's make it Avenir next. Let's make it a little bit bolder. Let's try demi bold and make it a little bit gray so that it's set apart from the black text. Then let's put it here, move it to the top, change the width to fill container. Let's also frame this so we can use auto layout and give it a 20 padding. And then make this a frame and change the padding to, let's say, 16 multiples of 4. And that looks good for the spacing. Let's change this into the food image. Let's go to Unsplash again, search up paella. And I like the look of this one, so let's choose this one, bring that down a bit. And let's paste that here, turn this rectangle into a mask so that only the paella is shown, and we can change how big it is here. So it looks just like this one now. Again, because we have a gray here, I want to change this back to the soft gray color, which acts as our black. And let's add a divider at the top. And I'll go ahead and make the rest of the list look like this as well. Alright, so I kept the red border around it just like we did with our cream colored day of the week. I tried a version where it didn't have the red and increased the corner radius of it, but I didn't really like how it looked with the rest of the screen, so I'll go ahead and put that back. So I chose to put the day of the week above the image in all caps with a grayer font so that it looks different from the main recipe text area, since this is just a marker for the day of the week, and this is ultimately how I decided to differentiate it. Since the other text is black, I made this a little grayer since it's not as prominent. I also made it all caps just for some variety, and I do think it's starting to look better because of the recipe images. Then I was just taking a look at the screen, and I really didn't like how the button was all the way at the top. I don't think I've ever seen a large CTA button on mobile just sitting at the top like that in a header, and for my past projects I've always put them towards the bottom. There's a rule called Fitz's Law that I briefly mentioned in my last video on where to put certain elements of design, especially buttons. These buttons, especially the main big buttons, should be situated somewhere close to the thumb, where a user could easily access it when just holding a phone with one hand. So that is usually at the bottom, especially the bottom right corner or the bottom middle. So I decided to just move the entire main generated menu button to the bottom and give it a very subtle shadow. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's make it 20 pixels from the bottom navigation. Let's give it a little bit of a shadow in effects here, just so that it looks like it's hovering a little bit. Make it dark red, bump it up a bit, make the blur bigger too. And let's also make it a little bit bigger to make it more prominent. I also think this was a good choice in terms of UX and also still keeps the design a little bit more modern. And let's fix the padding up here. Let's give it 32. All right, that's it for this iteration. So that's it for design iteration number 2. Let's move on to the next iteration. Alright, so up until this point, it had been maybe an hour, maybe 45 minutes-ish. I wanted to stop there, and that was the screen that I ended up with, but I still wasn't happy with it at the time. These next 2 iterations definitely took me over the 1 hour mark, but I still wanted to have some fun with it, so here's design iteration number 3. So basically, I looked at the Mobbin mood board screens again, and I realized these food images in our screen were so small and hard to see, and in all the inspiration screens have images of the food much larger, which definitely helps to break up the text as well, so I wanted to try that out with our designs. First off, what I did is make the image much bigger. I wanted to make sure that the user could tell what it was. I'm using the K shortcut for the scale tool, and then you click V to go back. And because the image is so big, I was able to add the day of the week in there, turn it to white, also make it a lot bigger. Change it to 16. Also, we could probably have it regular. And it's still kind of hard to see, so let's add a black gradient. You can do that by clicking here. Now the text is a lot more legible on the image. When you look at these other screens, like this one, or this one, you can see that they do something similar whenever they have white text over the image. They either have a black transparent layer over it or a black transparent gradient over it, so I recreated that here. Let's get rid of this red border because I don't think it's doing too much here. And then because the image is so large, let's move the text up at the top. And then because the image is so large, I made the recipe title bigger as well so that the image isn't overpowering the row too much. I still kept the country of origin around the same, but also decided to add some more details here because there's so much white space at the bottom down here. And also getting rid of this day of the week frame up here. I also added a little emoji for a little bit more imagery and made the text gray since this is more of secondary text. I want to remove these red lines because I didn't think it was needed since the images do a good job of grouping all of the row elements together so that it was very evident which row is which. And let's change the rest of this list to look like this. Alright, so that's about it for this iteration. Alright, so once again I looked at this and I wasn't really happy with it. I just for some reason did not like the way that the white text looked over the imagery. It still does look a little bit outdated to me, and I felt like there was a better way to do it, especially keeping with the brand design that we created for this. So in the next and final iteration number 4, that is what we'll be working on. So something I wanted to mention is these icons are actually Apple icons. You can copy these from an app called SF Symbols Beta, which has all of the Apple icons, and when you see something you like, you can just copy and paste it. So for example, if I wanted to look for fork and knife, it's here, which is the same one as this one. If I looked for menu, again, same here. Something to keep in mind is that when you paste it, so let's take this person, copy, and when you paste it here, because this text is Avenir Next, you won't be able to see it. You'll have to use a variation of SF Pro because SF Pro is the default Apple font and these are Apple icons. So make sure that you're using the correct font. You can change the size of it using K, the scale tool. You can also change the color of it. So it's very quick when you don't want to spend too much time on the icons in the beginning. And then you can go back and fix them at a later date. If I were to go and hunt for icons, I would use this Figma plugin called Iconify. They have so many icons here. You can also search for specific ones, so like knife and fork. Let's say I wanted to import one. I usually import it as a frame. We can scale it, make it smaller, bigger, and change the colors. Anyways, okay, back to the screens. So the difference between design iteration 3 and 4 in terms of changes is actually not a lot, but as you can see, the vibes of the screens will be very different. First, because I didn't like the black gradient with the white text, I wanted to incorporate that cream brand color and I decided to make it a chip instead. It was just something that I wanted to try and I wanted to see if it looked good. So I took the day of the week, let's change that to black. I turned it into a frame and let's bring over the brand colors here. Give this frame a background color and hit I for the color selection tool. And then I gave it some padding, turn the radius all the way up, and corner smoothing, I do the iOS 60%. Turn this into demi bold and also the brand red, and it looked a little aggressive, so let's just change it all to lowercase. The lowercase helps with a friendlier, cozier vibe. Now let's paste this to here and replace that. Center it here and give it a shadow. Let's also get rid of that black gradient on the image, and the shadow on the pill definitely makes it easier to read, even if it's laying on top of the image. Let's also add a higher corner radius to this box to make it a little bit more cozy, and I also decided to add some more text here. Frame these two, make it go left and right, and fix the padding, and then let's fix the rest of the list. Alright, so I do believe that this is it. Let me bring back design iteration 3 just so we can compare. When you see these two side by side, like I said, it wasn't that much of a change, but the aesthetic and the vibe of the screens are much different. And I think this last screen just fits the vibe of the brand that we decided on much better. And that's it for iteration 4. So I forced myself to stop there. I feel like I'm the type of person to see one of my final designs and never feel like it's finished and that there's always something to improve. And if I did have more time, I would definitely see what I could do about the bottom navigation bar. It's perfectly fine as it is, but we could definitely stylize it a little bit more to match the coziness of the rest of the app, since right now it's just the default Apple icons. I would also probably experiment more with the rows and somehow incorporating the imagery more. Also, maybe there's some more ways to incorporate the cream color, but for right now, for a quick redesign, with a time limit of about an hour-ish, I feel like we're at a good place to stop. Let me share what I learned from this redesign and give you practical tips you can use immediately. Starting with redesigns are perfect for beginners. You're not staring at a blank canvas paralyzed by infinite possibilities. You have constraints, existing functionality, already established patterns, and those constraints allow for streamlined creativity. Plus, you can find any screen on any app on your phone right now and choose that to redesign. Remember to use those Figma shortcuts like R for the rectangle tool, K for the scaling tool, V to exit the scaling tool, T for the text box, I for the color selector tool, and all of your plugins like Iconify, modify and unsplash. Also, remember you can use SF symbols for your icons. I will say this is only for iOS apps and not Android, and also I do use an SF Pro font, or else the icons won't show. For colors and spacing, try to use multiples of 4 or 8. Limit your color palette to 2 to 3 maximum. I usually use a grayer text for secondary text and a darker gray or black for primary text, and choose one accent color for your CTAs and very large buttons, and maybe one other secondary accent color. And also, seriously set a timer. Christian actually just told me about Parkinson's law, which basically means that work expands to fill the time available. So give yourself just an hour and you'll accomplish more than in a day without a deadline. Here are some common mistakes to avoid. Too many fonts. Stick to 1, maybe 2, and don't forget that system fonts are fine in the beginning. Inconsistent spacing. Pick a system like 4 pixels and stick to it. Not enough spacing. Let your designs breathe a little bit. Your users are now used to scrolling. Too many colors. Keep it simple with a grayscale and 1 or 2 accent colors. No visual hierarchy. Squint at your design and see if you can tell which parts are important. It should be easy for your eye to follow what to look at. Ignoring patterns. Users have expectations, so it's important to keep them. Not getting feedback. Show everyone around you, your mom, your dog, your best friend, and last but not least, perfectionism. And honestly, it might never feel like it's truly finished. Don't think things like I'm not creative enough or I'm not a real designer. Start thinking like, what would make this better for the user, and what small improvement can I make right now? So right now, if you're still motivated and if you can, open up Figma, screenshot any app, set yourself a timer, recreate any screen, and change 3 things. After that, just share it somewhere and see what feedback you can get. The scariest part is starting. Once you're in Figma moving rectangles around, you'll realize it's just rectangles and colors and text. And that's it. So that concludes our redesign. I hope this helped you see my thought process on my design decisions so that you can refer back to them when you start designing or whenever you have design decisions to make on your own. And of course, these are all my opinions and my design style and my design aesthetic and how I'm designing at this point in my design career and design journey. I'm sure in like a year or even 6 months, I'll look back on these designs and find 1,000 different things that I can improve. But I think that comes with being a designer and knowing that you're getting better. I also hope this helped you see how I use Figma as a tool and also demystify Figma. And if you have any tips and improvements for me, feel free to leave a comment below. I'm always trying to learn and improve through the design community here, and also comment on what you'd like to see next. And as always, thanks for watching.